this is Patty at the Lion Brand Yarn Studio, and we're here with Kim and Pat Novak, who literally wrote the book on the knitting board basics, and we're going to get to find all about the knitting board, and for all you sock knitters out there, and I know you're out there, come on, you know you're out there, this new amazing sock loom, which I'm so excited about getting my hands on. So welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Welcome so
Thanks,
much.
Thank you very much.
So first and most obvious question, and either one of you can take it.
Okay.
How did you get involved in loom knitting?
Well, actually, I kind of started it. I was traveling to South America, and I found this tool that was like two pieces of wood with string tied together, and people were making sweaters and knitwear out of it, and I just was like fascinated, and I thought it was so cool. So I got one, brought it back, showed it to my mom, and she was like, wow, this is really cool. And then we eventually started learning how to make sweaters, and we started selling them at craft shows, and kind of evolved over time to this.
Wow, so that leads me
started.
to my next question, and Lindsay, you wouldn't mind handing me the lovely gray sweater right off the top. What people often ask me is, oh, well, the loom, you use that for pot holders and scarves and blankets and things, right? I'm sure you guys get that a lot. People think all you can do is a rectangle. So people don't understand the concept of
the knitting board.
Sweaters, with the knitting board, that you can do sweaters and bags and hats and scarves and socks.
Definitely. It's
so
not the simple scarf and pot holders. I mean, you can do that, but because the 28-inch board is long and it has 84 needles, you're able to do about 7 different stitches, zigzag, crisscross, cables, all kinds of things. And because the pins are very close together, you're able to do very tight stitches. And there's ways to adjust the gauge where you can do very wide stitches or very tight. You can get many different looks with the one loom.
So I mean, like this sweater that I have in my hand, for example, is a beautiful stitch pattern. So obviously this answers a lot of people's questions.
Stitch, yeah.
Is, you know, does it do more
stitch.
than stockinette? So obviously the answer is yes.
Yes.
Cabling, and does it do lace?
I haven't tried lace with it, but it probably could. Have you done any with lace?
Not what you would think of as lace so much, you know, with the real fine, but we use all weight yarns. We use very fine to the big bulky. But like Kim was saying, we have the adjustable spacer in the boards, and what that does is open up the width between the 2 rows of needles, which gives you a larger stitch when you weave.
Right,
so you're getting a very lacy open look. So,
but you can do knit two togethers. You
yes.
do increases
Yeah,
and
you
decreases,
can,
and
yeah.
after all, what is lace other than a series of increases and decreases?
Right.
That's
Definitely,
all
yeah.
it really is.
It just depends on the yarn and how you have your spacer set, and you can create, you know, so many different looks with it.
So what is the gauge range that you're able to get from? Can you do very fine knitting to very chunky knitting?
Definitely, yeah. I'm not a 2-needle knitter, so I don't know exactly, you know, how you would say it in with 2 needles, but the gauge is very fine to a very bulky knit.
So maybe this is, I always ask.
But she knits with 2 needles.
I always ask this question to all of our guests, which is, be honest, do you gauge swatch? So how does gauge swatching translate to the knitting board? Do you do a sample? Do you test it out and then measure the gauge to be able to figure out how you make a
We tell
project?
everybody to make sure you test your gauge by doing a swatch. And does
Yes,
everybody
so do
do it? Not necessarily. That is the best way, of course, because every yarn and every setting on the board will make changes. But kind of to answer your question, our basic gauge is going to be about 3 stitches to 1 inch.
So
knitting
nice,
in
nice
a
chunky.
kind of a worsted weight yarn. That's kind of where you're going to fall, but you can do 5 stitches to 1 inch, and then down to 2.5 of the big chunky ones. So it does vary, yeah.
For our hand knitters out there, anything from a DK weight to a bulky weight.
From a baby
DK
yarn
through worsted, through heavy worsted, Aran, chunky, bulky.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
So really
yeah.
a large
You know,
range.
it's so neat because you just have to kind of decide what look do I want to achieve, and everyone who knits with needles knows that, you know, I can change the needle size and I can make different changes to achieve that look. But also with the knitting board, you can achieve literally any look you want, and you just got to play with it a little bit and learn some of the different ways to make those changes.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've heard this before. We had a customer in the other day, and she's unfortunately having problems with carpal tunnel, and she's having trouble continuing to knit. And so we brought out the knitting board, and we happened to have a demo one set up for her to play with, and she fell in love with it.
Right.
Oh, that's great.
And she she hopes to someday get back to the needles after she rests, but she thought, well, I'm going to do this too. And I said, yeah, you don't have to pick.
Tell her to alternate.
Yeah,
alternate back and forth. That has been one of the most rewarding things when we decided to stop knitting and trying to make knits for everybody and teach them how to use the knitting board. That's when we became so emotionally involved with our craft, is because we were able to help people that not only needle knit, but for those who could no longer because of such things as pain in the hands and the wrists. And when I get a letter that says, I can go back and do what I love, that makes you feel so good. And yes, it's true.
Very emotional.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah, it's such a therapeutic type
And we just hear
movement.
that all the time.
And it feels
so many
good. It keeps
people.
driving us onward.
So now, last question is, and I got this question at the studio, and I wasn't entirely sure of the answer, which is, how young can you
Start knitting
How
on the
young
board?
can you start knitting
Oh, you
on the
can
board?
start knitting very young, about 5 years old.
Really?
Yeah, because it's just a really simple process, and that's the great thing about the board. It's just so easy to learn and to do, that it's just a weaving over the pins and then hooking over.
Right.
It's so simple. You can learn in literally a couple minutes.
Yeah, and it
That's
also
right.
depends on the child too.
Right,
Some are
right.
driven and some are reluctant to.
But to me, it's
stay
amazing
patient,
how
but
fast they pick it up.
It is.
Yeah, well, they're like little sponges.
Yeah,
Yes.
you show them once and there they go with it. I'm like,
Right.
wow.
We stop learning as our brains, solidify. But when you're young, you absorb an entire
Right.
so much information.
It's true.
Well, I'm so excited. I can't wait to see your presentation. So for those of you who couldn't be with us in New York, check out Knitting Board Basics. And what's your website?
It's www.knittingboard.com.
Knittingboard.com. Could it be any easier to remember? Knittingboard.com. Check it out, and I hope you enjoy checking out the knitting board. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.